So for Lourdes, I have agar, how much to use. If you have a flaky, very light agar, you're gonna use 2 tablespoons of it. If you have a very fine powder, you're gonna use 2 teaspoons of it. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So I have a couple of pots here on my stove. Let me turn this down so you can kind of see what's going on here. And these are the only 2 pots I have in my house, a medium and a big one. So I don't have a very small one. So the syrup that I'm going to use to coat the bottom of my flan dishes, which I just realized that I didn't leave enough. Well, I'll figure this out right now. I didn't leave enough for my little flan dishes. But I'm going to use this bigger pot just because it'll be easier for me to pour like the actual flan mixture from this smaller one. So to make the syrup, because all flan, as we know, has like this syrup that you put on the bottom of whatever mold that you're using. And once the flan is like solidified and it's ready to eat, you typically flip that flan dish over, the mold over onto another plate. And then you get left with this like running syrup over the flan. And so that's what we're gonna make right now. So here I'm starting with 6 tablespoons of raw turbinado sugar. It's like a flaky, it's not brown sugar. It doesn't have that same like stickiness that a brown sugar has, but it's very flaky. It's very, it's a sugar that hasn't been highly processed. It's not bleached, it's not white sugar. If you have white cane sugar, you could use that. This is just my preference of the type of sugar and the sweetness that I like. So I have 6 tablespoons here, and then I have a 1/4 cup of water that I already measured out. And so I'm just gonna put that into my big pot here. And I have it on just like a medium heat, medium low heat. I just want it to cook slow and steady. I'm going to use these 2 to be my flan molds actually. There's 2 so far. I'm going to grab my spatula and I'm just going to give that a little mix just to make sure all the sugar is coated in the water. And then I'm just going to let that bubble. I don't want it to turn into a caramel where it's just like cooked so much where it just is like really thick. I want it to be a syrup. So think of like a maple syrup texture. So this will take a few minutes to cook until it comes to that bubble. And then the other thing I look out for as it's cooking is that I want to make sure as I see it start to bubble up, if I move my pan, like if I hold on to one hand and lift it up, I can see all the granules there. And that means that the sugar's not melted down yet. So when I do this and it's like a smooth, runny syrup with no granules in sight, that's when my syrup is just about there. So I'm gonna just leave that on the back burner literally as I start to look at my other ingredients here. So this front pot, which I actually should turn off, this front smaller pot is what I'm gonna use to start playing with my other ingredients. So I do this in like a few different steps. So the syrup is one step, and then the next step is gonna be the coconut milk, which this is like filled to the brim. I have coconut milk, I have coconut cream, and I have the agar. And so the coconut milk and the cream are great for this recipe because first of all, like it is super yummy as like this coconut flan, because we all know that flan is great and it's so many people flavor it in so many different directions. You have everything from like choco flan to actual like coco flan. And so this is a great way to use coconut milk and have that fattiness in the flan, because flan is typically like an egg yolk base, and a lot of that is like the fatty texture that you want in like this like custard that holds up, right? And so that's what the coconut milk and the coconut cream will create in this dish. And you'll see that the cream is like a bit thicker. If you were to like pop this in the fridge, it'd be like almost rock solid because it's essentially like a very fatty ingredient. And then I'm just using the 2 teaspoons of agar fine powder, but if you again have that flaky, lighter agar, you're gonna use 2 tablespoons of it, okay? So I'm gonna, before turning on my pan, or my pot, sorry, I'm gonna go ahead and put in my coconut milk. And I'm like just out of the shot here. Let me get in there. So I have my coconut milk that just went in, and this is 1.5 cups of unsweetened coconut milk. So no added sugar, we're adding all the sugar ourselves. All right, so that is my 1.5 cups, and then I have 1/3 cup of my coconut cream that I'm gonna add to the same pot with my coconut milk. And then I'm going to add in my agar. Put that aside. And so I'm just gonna sprinkle that in. And my stove is not on right now. The reason it's not on is because like once this agar gets going, it really starts to thicken up, and I wanna make sure that I mix in all of my ingredients really well before I turn on the heat. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab my whisk, and let me show you real quick what this looks like before I whisk it. So you'll see that there's like a clear definition of the different ingredients in here. You can see the coconut milk is there, the coconut cream is like floating in the center, the agar is right on top, and I am going to awkwardly hold my computer to whisk everything together. My heat is off right now, so no heat on. Let me make sure this is all really well incorporated. And just, you can take note of the, obviously it's like already a creamy texture, it's already a bit heavy, but as the agar, when I turn on the heat and it starts to bubble up and cook, it'll just get slightly thicker. So it's already kind of, you know, coating my whisk, it's already kind of coating the side of the pot. It'll just do that a bit more. If you're using the flaky agar, you'll be able to still see all the little specks of the flakes in there. I'm gonna go ahead and turn on my stove. You'll be able to see all the specks of the agar in there, and then once you start to see all of them melt and disappear into the liquid here, into the coconut cream and the coconut milk, and it starts to bubble up and thicken, that's when you've reached the point of, you know, it being, you just really, what you're trying to do is like melt the agar into whatever it is that it's the liquid that it's in. So here I have that going on a medium heat, and then I have my syrup back there, which still has not hit. I'm gonna turn that up slightly. It's on a very low heat, so I'll turn that up a little bit more. And as that's going, I'm gonna start working with a couple other ingredients here. So, let me pull this out.
Jocelyn, a quick question.
Yeah?
Should the sugar syrup be bubbling?
So it should be on a low bubble. If it's like bubbling out of control and moving up your pot, it's too hot. So you want it to be on like the simmer. Mine hasn't started simmering yet, but yes, you do want it to start to bubble up. And then just check on it and move it around in your pot just to make sure that it's not really sticking to the bottom. It is sugar, so there's a tendency for it to burn easily or stick to the bottom of your pot. You could see, I can start to show you here that mine, I'm seeing a little bit of steam. It's not quite super bubbling yet. Okay, this is the one. So you can see that it's starting to bubble a little bit. And then as I move it over, I can start to see that there's still, I can see the sugar there. The granules are still there, but they're starting to melt. So you want it to be just slightly thick syrup. So this is still very much water if you look at it. It's like a tea, like a sugary tea. You want it to feel like a syrup. So think of a maple syrup texture. You want it to get to that point.
Could you use just a maple syrup instead too?
You could, although maple syrup also does have a flavor that isn't traditional for flan. So you could use a maple syrup, but I mean, sugar and water is like what's traditionally used for a flan dish. So yeah, this is starting to bubble up for me now. I'm gonna keep it on the stove, keep watching it, making sure it doesn't burn for another few minutes, and then I'm gonna put it into my flan molds. Any other questions coming through so far?
We have a few.
Okay.
Are there any other milk substitutes that you've tried and that have worked?
I mean, you could try other plant-based, like if you tried maybe like a thick cashew milk or something like that, you could use that as an alternative, although I like the fattiness and the flavor of the coconut in this dish. It's what makes it like a coconut flan. But if you don't like coconut flavor, you could try something that is kind of thick and creamy. I mean, if you were to just use like almond milk out of a carton, you wouldn't, it would be almost like when you eat those flans in the plastic container that you like open the lid and it's like very watery, you'd get that like watery, not like thick and creamy texture. I mean, it would still work, but it just wouldn't be the same. So it'd be quite different. All right. And I am just starting to see that my coconut cream, my coconut milk is starting to just like slowly warm up here. And again, these are things that I want to keep an eye on. If you're a multitasker, you can start to look at like what's next. If you're not a multitasker, you can just focus. This is already multitasking, just watching both. You want to make sure that they don't stick to the bottom, they don't burn. You want to, with your whisk, just make sure that you're, you know, checking the bottom of your pot, making sure that nothing's sticking there. But overall, if you have it on like a medium heat where you're constantly checking it and controlling that heat, you should be able to kind of like check out the next steps of the recipe without it burning. If you have it on like super high heat, then you might go ahead and like burn it as you're going. So my syrup is almost there. I'm gonna give it just another couple minutes. And I'm going to just explain one of the next ingredients I'm gonna be using for this dish. It's this, and I know this is like pretty specific. I like to use this Follow Your Heart vegan egg substitute. It's a plant-based egg replacer. This is different than like the Bob's Red Mill egg replacer, which is like something that you would use if you were like baking cake or something like that, where it creates like a binder. This particular type of egg replacer, they made it so that you can make like a quote unquote scrambled egg, and it has like a flavor and texture profile of a scrambled egg. I've had this with like huevo con chorizo, you know, all vegan, and I was just like, what? It is really like a scrambled egg. It's crazy. It's like, it definitely does a trick. I'm starting to see bubbling here, so I'm just gonna check my ingredients.
Was your coconut milk sweetened out of a carton, or was it coconut milk out of the can after the cream was separated?
It was coconut milk out of a can. Everything that I'm using is unsweetened. So if you're using a sweetened coconut milk, because that's what you have on hand, just go lighter on the sugar that you're going to use when you kind of put all these things together. The sugar for the syrup is fine, but we have additional sugar that we're going to add to a blender with other ingredients. And so you can go a bit lighter on that sugar, and you can literally like taste it and see if it needs to be a little bit sweeter and add more as needed. But because that coconut cream that you might have on hand is already sweetened, you don't want to overly sweeten this. All right, so I'm starting to see my things are just about there. This goes pretty quickly, y'all. Like my sugar granules are melted. I'm just waiting for this to just slightly, I mean, it's already kind of starting to thicken up. Thicken up in the sense of like, if I put my spatula inside of my pot with the sugar and the water, hopefully I don't drop my computer here. Like as I do this, can you all see? I know my pot is black and the syrup is brown, but it's almost sticking to the bottom of my pan. Like it's getting into that syrup consistency. It'll thicken up when I take it off the heat, because obviously because it's hot, it's like keeping it super loose and pliable. I can see here that my pot of coconut cream, milk, and agar is bubbling. I'm gonna slightly lower the heat on that, but I can see that it's starting to thicken up a little bit more, sticking to the side of my pot just a little bit more. And you really want it to just simmer here for just a couple minutes, just to make sure that that agar was heated all the way through, melted into your coconut milk and your coconut cream. And then that way it's not going to be just like little floating granules of agar, that it's actually like incorporated fully into the dish. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my syrup at this point, and I'm going to pour it into my flan molds. So let me do that now. I'm going to carefully do that because that's really hot. Put this here. So I have the, I'm just using, you can use a couple of different, this will serve like 3 to 4 people. You can serve it in like one big mold, or you can do like little ones. I'm going to do 3 little ones. You could do 4 little ones and just pour less into each mold. So I'm going to start with 3 here. All right, and I'm just going to use another spatula here. Check the handles to make sure they're not too hot. I can see here that my syrup, let me try to get, I think I'll be able to show you a bit better once it's on the white background of these like little serving dishes. So let me do that. All right, so I'm gonna just use my spatula here to scrape down the syrup and pour a little bit into each one of these molds. All right, so I got what I need here. I'm gonna set this aside. My whisk here. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off my coconut cream and my coconut milk as well. It came to a nice simmer. It was simmering for a few minutes. If you're looking at this and you have the agar flakes and you don't see any little bits of flakes left anymore, it's like completely melted in, which is the same thing goes for gelatin, right? Like you want it to melt into whatever liquid it is that you're cooking it in. And so let me show you here our little syrup. So this was the granules of sugar, and see how it's just kind of slightly thick. As this cools down, it'll thicken just a bit more. But it's not like a caramel. Caramel is already cooked a lot more. Like if I cooked this down for a few more minutes, it could have become a caramel. But I don't want it to get to that point. I want it to be this like loose syrup. And that is the base of our flan into the dishes here. So I'm gonna move on to the egg replacer, which is what I was talking about. So the next step of our dish is, and again, this is mostly for flavoring, and again, like another texture ingredient, because it, also serves a purpose of like thickening up the dish with like a quote unquote egg. But it also, if you have this at home and the recipe calls for, or for the preparation for this calls for, a couple tablespoons of the egg replacer with some ice cold water. And so once you start to whisk that, you immediately get hit with the scent of like egg and like a little bit of this like sulfur smell. And it's for somebody who's vegan, who hasn't eaten eggs in a very long time, it's kind of like, whoa, okay, like this is very eggy, a little too much, but it just works for this dish. Again, if you don't have this particular brand, I have seen Just Egg as another egg replacer that also serves a purpose of like being a scrambled egg. I haven't used it in this recipe yet, but I imagine that it would be a very similar idea of like using this egg replacer for the purpose of this dish. So what I have here for this egg replacer is I have 2 tablespoons that I already measured out here. I'm gonna push back my little flan molds. I turned off the heat already on my coconut cream, coconut milk, agar mixture because it was already bubbling. It's already kind of thickened up. I turned it off for a moment. I'm gonna come back to it in a second. And here I have, so even though this looks like it's a carton of eggs, it's literally like this bag. I have one open here. it's this like little soy protein like bag inside of the little carton, and it's a powder inside. And so that's what I'm going to be using. Let me set this aside. It's this powder, 2 tablespoons of it. And then it calls for the 2 tablespoons, it calls for ½ cup of ice cold water. So I have my water here. I'm going to just use a fork to whisk it together because I don't have a second whisk, but I could take the whisk out. I'll just use a fork for the purpose of this right now. Let me get a little closer so you're in the action here. So I'm just going to pour my ice cold water into the 2 tablespoons of the egg replacer. And you're going to see how this quickly starts to become an egg, like a beet egg. It's kind of crazy. I splashed some out on myself here. Let me put it back in there.
If you're not vegan, could you just use 1 egg at this point instead?
I mean, I haven't tried the recipe that way. I mean, I get a lot of questions of like, what if this, what if that? I haven't personally, you know, tried the recipe that way. You could test it out and see how it comes out. But obviously, like, I haven't made it with an egg, so I don't know.
And then how long did the syrup simmer? Was it about 7 to 9 minutes?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Jocelyn,
Yes?
quick question. So if I have the Bob's Red Mill and the Just Egg, you recommend the Just Egg instead?
Oh, the Bob's Red Mill, like the...
Yeah.
So you don't have the Follow Your Heart is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can try the Just Egg as a replacement to give it that flavor and the texture.
Mm-hmm.
So this ended up turning into, I mean, I used 2 tablespoons of the powder and I used ½ cup of ice cold water. So this is like a little over ½ cup. Although I don't know how potent the Just Egg is. I would use, I mean, you can test it with ½ cup and see how it works out, if the flavor is too strong or not. And then let me know how that works out. I can test it next time with the Just Egg as well, if I can get my hands on some soon. All right, so this is all incorporated now. This is my Follow Your Heart egg. You can see that it's like sort of this, like, imagine that you just like kept beating on a scrambled egg until it kind of became foamy and airy. That's what I have here. And next up, I'm going to work on a couple more ingredients that I have here that let me pull up to the screen. So I'm setting aside that egg for just a moment. And then I have a few more ingredients that I'm bringing here. I have the extra firm tofu that I squeezed to try to get as much of the liquid out. I have just about 2 tablespoons here. Again, just another like texture point and something to help kind of like thicken the flan overall. And then here I have another ½ cup of raw sugar. So if you were working with the coconut cream or milk that was sweetened, you want to go a little bit lighter on the sugar here and taste it when it gets all blended up. Taste it to see if it needs more sugar or if it's sweet enough. So again, this is 2 tablespoons of my strained, squeezed, extra firm tofu. And then I have a ½ cup of raw sugar, the same sugar that I used at the beginning for the syrup. And then here I have a tablespoon. I use this like vanilla blend. It's this Mexican brand called, it's blanking on me. I always like pour my things into like another container, but it's a Mexican brand that we use that's like a blend. It does have a few other things in it. If you're just using like a vanilla extract that's like pretty potent and strong, like if I smell this, I definitely smell vanilla. It's slightly sweet. I can smell alcohol in it, but it's not as strong as or potent as like those tiny little bottles of vanilla extract, which I don't really use because I think that the flavor is just too strong for me. Like, but if you do have that, you want to just use a few drops. You don't want to use a whole tablespoon. And so I'm using here a tablespoon of the vanilla that I bring in from Mexico. And then the other thing that I'm going to add to this little concoction here is I have some turmeric that you can use to just, this is mostly for coloring. I don't want my flan to taste like turmeric. I just want it to have almost like this color here of my Follow Your Heart egg replacer. Once this gets mixed in with the coconut cream and all these other ingredients I have here, I'm gonna dilute this like nice, beautiful yellow egg color. And this is where the turmeric comes in, to color the flan into this yellow color. And so I'm gonna end up tossing all of these things, my sugar, my vanilla extract, my tofu, a pinch of turmeric into a blender. And I'm going to add a little bit of the coconut agar mixture because I have a big old Vitamix. And if I don't, it's so big that it just can't blend the little bit of ingredients that this is. Usually when we make this for Todo Verde, we're making like large quantities, like 3 or 4 like big flanes, like twice the amount of these ingredients here. And so Vitamix works just fine. But in this case, when I'm making it for just like a smaller home version, I need to add a little bit more liquid in there. So I have my Vitamix here. If you have a smaller blender like a Bullet, it should work for you to just go ahead and blend your vanilla, your sugar, your tofu. You can add, again, a little bit of this like coconut agar mixture. So in here, I'm adding my sugar and my tofu.
How much sugar are you adding again?
The sugar, and this is all in the recipe that got sent ahead of time too. The sugar is a 1/4 cup.
And if the sugar syrup has turned into a harder disc at the bottom of the mold, did it cook too long?
It might have cooked a little too long. You should be able to still work with it. I mean, if it's a hard disc, like, let me show you what mine looks like now. So it's been off the heat for a while. And so, I mean, check this out. I can still move it around. It's still pliable in the bottom of my mold, but it is a lot thicker. So, I mean, if yours is like a hard disc, it likely turned into a caramel. And so what that means is like when you flip over your flan dish, that sugar will likely not become this like melty sugar syrup or sauce that coats the flan. It might just be like a chunk of caramel that sits on the top of your flan. Okay, I hope that answered that question. All right, so I have my sugar, my tofu. I'm gonna put in my vanilla. And again, because I'm using this big old Vitamix cup, I'm gonna pour in, set my whisk aside. I'm gonna pour in just a little bit of this coconut agar mixture just to help me blend it in this Vitamix. I hope that will be enough there. All right, and my lid is here. And I'm missing, actually, the other things I talked about. My turmeric, just gonna add like a pinch of turmeric. I like to add it to the lid, you know, and let me show you what it's gonna look like. So a pinch is typically, if you were to use your thumb, your index finger, your middle finger, and your ring finger, and you were to grab something like, so just pinky up right here. Everything that you can grab with these fingers, that's a pinch, FYI. I think technically it's also like a 1/4 teaspoon or something like that is a pinch, but I'm gonna add about this much turmeric here. So imagining that this is a small, you know what the size of this cap is if you've gone to Trader Joe's. It's like a, just maybe about like 1 inch in diameter. And I'm just adding some turmeric into my blender. And then the last thing I'll add is just a little pinch of salt. Because I like to add salt to my sweets just to give them a balance of flavor. I think it also like heightens the flavor of everything in the dish. I'm using a flaky kosher salt here. This is the salt I use at home. Look at this like cute little cast iron that I put my salt in. My best little kitchen gadget here. So yeah, just like a flaky Morton salt. And I'm gonna go ahead and blend this up until it's smooth. And can you see? Yes. So as I'm blending, I'm using my tamper, which is this wand here, to just scrape down the sides of my blender. If you don't have a tamper, you can turn off your blender, use a spatula to just scrape the inside of your blender cup, and then put the lid back on, blend a bit further. And pretty much what I'm trying to do is just make sure that my sugar is fully blended in and incorporated, and that my tofu, I don't have like any little chunks of tofu that are left behind, that it's all really well incorporated. So I'm just gonna use my spatula here to scrape down the blender, and I'm gonna start mixing everything together now. So this is our kind of last combination of all the different elements of the dish that are bringing it all together.
And you use any salt you have available, like sea salt, and then for the egg replacer, can you use a flax egg?
So for the salt, yes, you can use any salt that you have on hand, except if it's like a gray or black salt, because the color will probably not look good in there. But yeah, just a pinch to give it a little bit of, I feel like salt amplifies the flavors in a sweet dish. And then for the flax egg, I would say no to the flax egg, just because the reason I'm using an egg replacer here is to give it the flavor of the egg as well, the flavor and the texture of egg. And flax egg, it doesn't do that. So I wouldn't necessarily use a flax egg here. So I'm gonna go ahead and I could pour everything into a bowl, or I mean, right now my pot has been off for a while, like I can put my hand on it, it's not too hot. I'm gonna pour everything into, actually let me just pour it into a bowl so I can bring it closer and show you. So I'll do everything here in a bowl. Move this aside.
And I'm going to go back to a question from a little bit ago from Melly. Which is your favorite coconut cream brand?
I wouldn't say that I have like a favorite brand. You know, I am pretty neutral when it comes to like coconut milk, coconut cream. This is the coconut milk that I used, that we buy wholesale for Vida Verde. So it's, I believe it comes from Thailand. Yes, it does. So it's a brand from Thailand. The coconut, the coconut cream that I used is Native Forest. I just had this on hand. So you can use like Native Forest, like a brand from like Thailand, or they come from a lot of Asian countries where, like, you know, they grow tropical fruits like coconuts and have an abundance of it. So let me go ahead and start putting everything into a bowl. You can keep asking any questions as I go along here. I'm just gonna use my spatula here to help me scrape out as much as I can out of this blender and out of the out of my pot as well. So I'm just scraping it down, going across all the sides here, scraping down everything. I want to work kind of quickly here. I know that I'm pausing to ask questions or answer questions and things like that. The reason you want to work a bit quicker is because your agar will start to kind of like become gelatinous and start to create like little chunks and bits in your flan as you go. So I should be working a bit faster, but again, I'm like answering questions and things like that, or stopping to kind of figure out best placement of my computer. But I got most of it out of my blender here. And then I'm gonna bring in all the remainder of my coconut cream and agar mixture, coconut milk, cream, and agar mixture here. So I'm using my spatula to scrape, try to get everything out. All right. Scraping my spatula down, getting every little last bit, got most of it out of there. And then the last thing that I'm bringing in here, which let me scrape down this fork with my spatula, is I have my vegan egg that I'm going to include here. And I'm going to incorporate that into the bowl here. So I'll use my spatula to scrape it down. and get all of that out. And then last thing I'll do is I'll use my whisk to make sure that this all gets whisked together really well. So I have all my ingredients all in this bowl together. I'm gonna just whisk it together. Still pretty warm. Make sure it all gets incorporated really well. At this point, if you're thinking about more sugar, you can taste, you know, if you were using the sweetened coconut cream and milk, you can taste it and see like, what does it need? Does it need a bit more of this or that? You can also check out the color and see, could I add a pinch more of turmeric? Not all turmeric is created equal. I know that my friend, she owns a company called Diaspora Co. Her turmeric that she imports from, you know, the farmers in India is so potent. That turmeric a little bit goes a long way. This Trader Joe's turmeric is not the same. So for me, actually, you can see the color here. It's a bit pale for me. I'm gonna add just a tiny bit more of turmeric. Okay, just a tiny bit more. I'll add it to my lid here again. Just another little splash of turmeric there, just to give it a bit more color. And let me whisk that up. So I can already see the turmeric. You can see little bits of it here. All right, and I'm gonna go ahead and let that be. I'm gonna clean off my whisk here. And then I'm gonna bring back my 3 molds that had the syrup in them. And I'm going to use my spatula to just pour in the flan. And you can see that it's a bit thick. Let me move the camera a bit so you can see a little bit more. Get it even closer. Hopefully I don't drop my laptop here. Let me try to do lefty. But you can see that it's a little bit of like this thick creaminess. And it's thick because it has the agar in it, it has the egg, it has the tofu in there. All those things support it as like thickening. All right, let me add this last bit here. And I'm just eyeballing here how much to add in each one of these molds. So I can see, okay, this first one needs a bit more. Let me go back.
Does the egg replacer smell?
The egg replacer, yeah, it smells a little bit like egg and sulfur. Like, I mean, that's just the smell of an egg, period, or vegan egg. Yeah, it has a little bit of a egg smell to it. All right, so this is all in my bowls. I can start to see that as it's cooling down, the agar is already doing its thing where it's starting to want to like gel up. I'm just gonna try to create a little bit of a flat surface, or I can use my spatula here. Like this one, it started to really thicken up here, so I'm gonna just try to flatten it a little bit with my spatula. Sorry if it's really loud. All right, and then what I would do at this point is I would cover it in plastic wrap and let it sit in your fridge for at least a couple hours. So this is what we're looking at here. So you just want to let it sit in your fridge for a couple hours because right now it's still pretty loose and it's almost like a pudding. And so let me show you. So I would just put a piece of plastic wrap on each one and put them away. Let me show you. I made some earlier. And you can see here that the texture is pretty firm and that it's, you can also see how it's like swimming around in the syrup. I can turn this around. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm going to, let me get this one out of the way. I'm gonna grab this and I'm gonna put my plate on top and then I'm going to flip the plate over, the whole thing over, and then I should have my flan. Ta-da! So that is the flan there. And you can see I still have some sugar that is pretty thick up here that didn't come down. So for folks who had that solid sugar that they said that, you know, that was a little bit too thick, like I still have some sugar here that didn't come down. It was just a little bit too cooked through. And so it's just a little too thick and it won't become a part of the dish. But I do have some other syrup here. It's just enough. It's just enough to like be an additional sweetener. All right. So any questions? Any questions coming through?
So the vegan egg doesn't need to cook to be edible.
No, it doesn't need to cook. What I found in making this dish is that it does heat through a little bit with the agar, with the coconut cream agar mixture, because everything's still pretty warm. If it were cold, I wouldn't even be able to mix anything in because my agar would already start to solidify or gel the dish, and I wouldn't be able to mix anything in. But because it's still pretty warm, that serves as a little bit of that purpose of like warming through your vegan egg.
And can you use foil or wax paper to cover?
Yeah, if you don't have plastic wrap, you can definitely use those other ones. I mean, the main reason I just cover it is to make sure like nothing else gets in there while it's like trying to solidify in the fridge, and that it doesn't pick up any other flavors in the fridge of whatever else you have in there.
Jocelyn, mine came out like a little bit, like the texture didn't look as smooth as yours. Like it almost looks sort of chunky, as if there's like mashed banana in it or something. So I'm wondering if that's just because I let the agar sit too long, or.
So that could happen sometimes if the agar sits too long, which for me it was happening because I was kind of talking as I was going. What you could do in that situation, if you haven't put it into your mold yet, is put it all in a blender and just like blend the whole entire, like, you know, like blend the coconut cream and agar mixture with the vegan egg, with the tofu and the sugar and everything, and just like blend it up, and that'll smooth out any chunks. And that'll also kind of like, as you blend it, kind of warms it through a little bit too, especially in a Vitamix. And then pour it into your mold with the sugar base. Any other questions coming through for folks? Somebody's here saying, sorry, I missed how long the flan goes into the fridge. It should be in the fridge for at least a couple hours so it can set. And then is anybody trying somebody was trying a different type of egg, right? And then for folks who did have the agar, what type of agar are you using? Like I know Ted had some agar there. Are you using the flaky agar? Are you using?
I use the powder.
The fine powder?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah. So you can check out to see how the texture comes out, and then play with it as needed. But again, if it's like the powder that I have is like really potent. So I could, somebody here is saying I could not find extra firm tofu. I bought firm. It's the same result. And then now powder agar. I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question. This is a private message. So, so anybody who's asking questions, sorry, Lourdes, if you're sending it privately to me, I know that Sarah can't see it, so I haven't taken a look at yours before. You can always send it to the whole group so we can all check it out. So I have powder agar, how much to use, and then was asking, oh, this was the person who was asking to use foil or wax paper. So you were able to see that one. Great. Oh, the brand is Now. I get it. Okay. I was like, now? Like, what do you mean now, agar powder? Okay, got it. So this is is that the flaky powder or is that the fine powder? Yeah, super fine one. Okay, great. So you're just gonna go, it's gonna be much less than the, when I sent the recipe, the 2 tablespoons was for that flaky agar. But if you're using the fine, you wanna switch to teaspoons and it's a lot less of the agar that you're gonna use because it's so much more potent. Any other questions from folks? And for folks who are cooking along, what is your process looking like so far? I know there's a few people who are making it right now. The agar brand that I'm using, I get it wholesale for Todo Verde. It is a product of China, gum agar, a powder for texture, and I think the brand is Molecular Ingredients. This is the one that I use. It's like super potent, probably even more potent than the fine powder that you're using. Like I could have used even less of it now, maybe even like 1 teaspoon, and I would have been fine. And I'm wondering if Just Egg worked. I wonder if I haven't personally used it with prepared this flan with Just Egg. I'm wondering if anyone out there is using Just Egg right now or has it on hand and is gonna be using it, because I'd love to see how that turns out. Next time I'm gonna go shopping sometime this week, likely on Tuesday, and I'll check to see if my local store has Just Egg, and if it does, I'll play with this recipe, although I'll probably be super flanned out, to be honest with you. There's so much flan this week. I have 6 little containers of flan right now. But I'll definitely play with the recipe and see if that's another alternative that we can use. And then the Just Egg is way cheaper than the Follow Your Heart on Amazon. Okay, so yeah, I mean, if I can double check to make sure that it works as an alternative, then yeah, I mean, for me, it's just, I've used the Follow Your Heart egg replacer for a while for different dishes. And so that's the one that I've always had on hand. The Just Egg one is one that I started to play with more recently, but because this book was written like a year ago, it was all last year, I haven't incorporated it into my recipes. Ted, you look like you're super whisking hard there. Working up, it's like our morning workout today, working up a sweat.
Yeah, I decided to do the sugar again. And so now basically the whole mixture is kind of more set in my bowl. So I'm like, whisking to break it up just a little. And I think I'm going to throw it into the blender though.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Throw it back into the blender, blend everything together, and then pour it into the mold afterwards. Cool.
So Jocelyn, once it's done, is it supposed to have kind of that same flan, creamy, eggy texture? Because I've made a lot of vegan flans, and that's always the issue, the texture. And I'm never sure if I'm doing something wrong or if a vegan flan is that's just how it's gonna be, that the texture is always a little grainy, like a little not as smooth and creamy.
Yeah, so it should, the texture is a little bit of this like smooth and creaminess, although it might not ever be like exactly like the flan because it's not egg exactly, right? So the texture will be like just slightly different, although like the one that I made yesterday, I'm gonna just grab a piece of it. I'm able to cut it. I can move it really easily. This one I probably added a little bit too much agar to it last night, so it's like a little bit harder in texture. But when you bite into it, it does have a little bit of that creaminess. And it all depends on how much agar you use. So let me just wipe my hands down here. It all depends on the amount of agar, and because there's so many like different agar brands out there that are flaky and fine powder, you can fine tune it to get that exact amount of agar that you need in there to get that preferred creamy texture. The agar, you just want it to get just enough agar in there to hold it so you can cut it, or like to hold the shape and you can cut into it, or if you're like eating it with a spoon, you're able to like create a shape, right? Like it doesn't just all like ooze out. But then when you add too much agar, it could get a little bit stiff. So it's finding that fine line of like just how much agar you need. And then the flavor that you taste with this flan is definitely like the coconut shines through. You can taste the egg from the egg replacer. So you still feel this like kind of like traditional flan flavors, the sweetness of the syrup. And yeah, I mean, I feel like the flavors really shine through, and it like the flavor profile works. It's just the agar you have to find that good balance. And it's hard because, you know, here I'm saying like how much agar to use in the recipe, but if you're using like this one that I have here, it requires much less.
Is there a way, Evelyn had said a little bit ago that mine came out too watery. I used the flaky powder and the red mill egg replacer. Is there a way to save it if it's a little too watery?
Oh, so you use the Bob's Red Mill egg replacer, which honestly, I'm not sure that it would serve a good purpose in this particular dish, because that is more like if you're baking. That's what the Bob's Red Mill one is, because I think it has like, it might have like garbanzo and flax and like other ingredients to just bind, but I think you may also need to cook that for it to work out in the dish. So that might be the issue. And then if this is it watery after you've already refrigerated it, or is it watery prior to refrigeration is the other question. Because once you refrigerate it, it should solidify if it has the agar in there. When the agar is still hot, it's still liquidy. It's still, you know, pliable. And then as it sits out and it gets colder, here's the one I just made now. And it's just been sitting out. It hasn't been in the fridge. It's already starting to kind of like solidify a little bit. But it hasn't been refrigerated yet. I'm all tasting it. It's good.